So I just want to let you know that if you are going to miss talks or you have missed talks, we have a YouTube live stream that we're recording for later. And if you're on Twitter, we also are tagging the speakers. So if you want to look them up and also find other links and things that they've been up to, you can find that there. All right, so I'm going to start with our next speaker. This is the last 2 hours of this conference. And so our next speaker is going to be talking about Polkadot governance. His name is Joe Petrowski from Parity Technologies. He's a research analyst there and also a co-host of the podcast Relay Chain. So give a warm welcome to Joe Petrowski.
Oh, it's on. Hey, Cindy.
Hey. So floor's all yours.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so like Cindy said, I'm a research analyst at Parity. I've been there 2 years now. So talking about Polkadot governance and then some of the stuff that we've done on Polkadot and Kusama so far. So cool. I guess there's no way to get feedback on these virtual things if it's working. Okay, I see somebody's talking in the chat, so it seems to be working. Yeah, so I'll just start off with like a high-level view of Polkadot. It's something that we kind of designed as like a foundation for Web 3.0 that wouldn't just be like a single blockchain of these kind of like one-size-fits-all or a blockchain that kind of like tries to be everything for every application. We really want to focus on like building a network of blockchains and having multiple, and that there are a lot of like trade-offs involved with like whether you use smart contracts or a single blockchain or multiple blockchains, how you connect them. Today I'm mostly talking about the social coordination issues that actually go along with like evolving these blockchains. Because with Polkadot, we're not just talking about like a single blockchain, but like a whole network of multiple blockchains. And so it kind of adds a dimension to the issue of actually upgrading them and having them participate in some meaningful way. So our main objective with governance is that we want to allow users to express their wishes on chain without causing schisms or forks. So like we've seen some of the other chains, like especially Bitcoin, have a lot of different forks come from their network, and so that's something that we want to avoid. We want, like, it can be productive in some senses, but to a certain extent, like you need to have consensus over what the actual chain is, like which chain is the real one. And so to kind of like break this down into a bunch of different pieces, we have kind of like these sub objectives that kind of like feed into the overarching design goal. So first one is that token holders have ultimate control over the network. So that is like, you can think of like other hard forks and networks where, there might be some kind of like vague definition of consensus over like some decision, like, should we fork Ethereum or something? And you could have that from, some subset of the community or like all of the stakeholders that you would consider in this decision. But you're still kind of beholden to some other parties. So you could have like the miners just refuse to update their clients with some new software that actually like implements this fork. You could have like exchanges or aggregators like CoinMarketCap or I'm forgetting the British one that has the metrics. But like, there are still like other parties who kind of say like, well, this is the chain that we're calling this chain. And so we want to really kind of have this like, as be like the token holders have the ultimate control over the network, and it's not really in the hands of somebody else. The second part is that every stakeholder feels that their voice is represented. It doesn't mean that everybody gets their way. It's not a democracy. It doesn't mean like one person gets or one stakeholder gets one vote. But there is a way for all stakeholders to participate in the system and to feel that their voice is heard with some appropriate level of conviction, which I can dive into a little bit more because we like kind of formally defined conviction. stakeholder has a formal definition, which is basically somebody who has tokens. And I kind of like put this on here because like first in my previous example about like miners and stuff, like they don't necessarily have to be stakeholders in a network or token holders in some sense. They could be like, you know, outside of the community in some way. And also like one of our like very kind of like say like philosophical goals with Polkadot is that, and I think just like Web3 in general, is that we want to create like new forms of societies, like new ways for people to organize and communicate with each other. So, you know, if you kind of look at like a historical definition of a society, of like a nation state or something, you know, it's one of them will like make decisions that affect a lot of other people. So like, you know, I'm kind of like American by my heritage, and America certainly makes a lot of decisions that affect people in the world who are not Americans. Definitely a lot of people in crypto companies. If you're one of those people, you don't get to go like vote in America and participate in that governance. Likewise, like I live in Germany, but I'm not a citizen of Germany. I like the decisions that get made in German governance have an effect on me, but I have no way to like vote or participate in that. And so in blockchains, like blockchains are economic agents. They understand like a token holder versus not a token holder. And so we have this kind of formal definition of a stakeholder. And you know, there are always kind of like these side effects. So like you could say like, well, you know, Facebook has an impact on my life, but there might not be. I mean, Facebook's maybe a bad example because they're public, but you know, if it's some other company that's private, you know, you wouldn't have a way to like go acquire shares and start participating in that company because you feel like it's impacting your life. And so with like these Web3 open protocols, like we don't really hide from the fact that like these have side effects and like consequences in the real world that might affect people who like didn't participate in the network before that time. But there is a way that somebody can become a stakeholder in the network and start participating in the governance of it if they feel like it's affecting them in some way. So the next one, the network arrives at consensus for a decision deterministically. So yeah, we kind of like, we can formally say this is the decision that was arrived at, like, are we going to, you know, implement this upgrade or not? And it's not really like informal. And then the actual enactment is part of the decision-making process. So we don't just come to a decision and then like ask the miners or validators to follow it. The enactment actually happens as part of the decision-making process. So this is kind of like how we express the kind of like original vision that we want everybody to be able to participate in this without having like forks or schisms form in the community. So kind of like breaking down more how we do this, Polkadot has this tricameral system. So we have kind of like three general assemblies or bodies in the system. So one is called the council, one is the technical committee, and then the third is just kind of everybody else, everybody who holds tokens. So the council manages an on-chain treasury for self-funding. You can make treasury proposals and receive funding from the chain's treasury. And then it also does like quite a bit other stuff that I'm gonna go more into. And then, but like, yeah, so all changes go through stake-weighted referenda, and this kind of goes back to the original point that like the majority of the network, like the majority of the stakeholders of the network always have like the ultimate control in guiding this network. So we do have like these kind of like collectives, this council and technical committee, and they do have like certain power over like a normal stakeholder. But ultimately, like if more than 50% of the tokens in existence and issuance want to go along with some direction, that will always like ultimately overrule anything that comes from like the council or technical committee. And then some of the stuff I'll end with is showing how Polkadot, this governance, this whole kind of like suite that we've put together, this kind of enables Polkadot as an economic or political agent, and allows like economic and political agents within its own network, and kind of how this is different from some other networks, or I guess any other network that we've seen so far. So yeah, first I'm going to kind of like go through these bodies. So the first one is the council. Its main job is to represent passive stakeholders. So we use a fragment approval voting to do this. And so token holders can kind of like vote for candidates. I think they can vote for up to 16 of them. And they just kind of say like, well, these are the 10 or the 5 or the 15 candidates that I find, or I feel represent me well, and like I would want to have on the council representing my views. And this fragment approval algorithm, it kind of like figures out, okay, we have all of these people saying like these are their acceptable candidates. What's the combination of councillors that would have the most backing? So like, what's the most acceptable set of councillors? And this is one member, one vote. So even if you're a huge token holder, it would actually be very difficult to get more than one councillor behind you or like with your backing and be able to exclude people. So even with like a huge amount of tokens, it would still be very difficult to get like a representative backing within the council. And then this rotates every 7 days. So every 7 days there's a new vote. I think right now in Polkadot we have 13 council members, but we plan to kind of gradually grow this up to 23. And on Kusama we also started with 13, and I think we're up to 19 now. So like this is growing. A lot of people or also organizations are interested in becoming counselors. And so like a counselor is just an address. So it can be a person. It can be like a multi-sig that's like kind of like a consortium of people. We have some foundations on there, like one of our block explorers is Polkascan, and like there's a Polkascan foundation that has a council seat. And eventually we will surely see parachains actually have like a seat on the council. And so the council can kind of like push through proposals to public referendum with some like different passing criteria, and also like cancel proposals that they find dangerous. So like if somebody puts in a proposal that would be damaging to the chain, the counselors are kind of expected to be like more intimately familiar with the system and be able to say like, hey, this is a bad idea and we're going to block it. They can only do that once. So if people, if the community still really feels like they want to do this thing that the council disagrees with, somebody can always re-propose it, and the council wouldn't be able to stop it. It would have to go into a public vote. So the second one is the technical committee. And we kind of like consider this the last line of defense against software errors. So they're council appointed. They're not publicly voted, although the council is publicly voted and the council appoints the technical committee. The kind of like soft rule for this is that each team that has implemented a Polkadot host or runtime can get a seat in the technical committee. So it's not a fixed number of seats, like 3 or 5. Right now it's 3, but as more teams implement Polkadot hosts and runtimes, they'll be able to join the technical committee. And the committee can't actually make any proposals. They can only accelerate proposals. So the council could propose like some bug fix, and the council would approve it. The technical committee can like fast track it. So normally like a proposal would go into the queue and it would wait like 28 days before it even open for voting. And then it would be open for 28 days of voting. And the technical committee can just say like, no, we need to vote on this now for like a period of 6 hours or 12 hours or something, because this is a little bit more urgent. So it can speed things up, but it can't actually like propose things itself. And then finally, everything goes through a public referendum. This is kind of like where all the token holders can make their conviction known. So there's kind of like simple coin voting as like the very basic, foundational primitive of say like blockchain voting. At least that's like reasonably Sybil resistant. But we wanted a way that like, one token holder couldn't like control everything. And so when you vote, you actually have this conviction. So if you have like a normal vote, the voting period is like 28 days, and then there's an enactment period that's also 28 days. So at the end, once a proposal passes, there's still 28 days before it actually gets enacted. And everybody who voted on the winning side of that proposal has their tokens locked for those 28 days. So if the proposal passes, then the people who voted aye have their tokens locked. If the proposal fails, then the people who voted nay have their tokens locked. So this is kind of like the default. Like if you had 100 dot and you vote aye, it passes, then your 100 dot would be locked for 28 days, and it would kind of have like a power of 100 dot. But if you like are really passionate about this decision and you think it's like really critical, and you're willing to like, you might not have like the enough value to like acquire more tokens, or you don't want to for some reason, but you're willing to like buy into this decision and live with the consequences longer, you can do that. So I think you can vote up to 6x conviction, where like every multiple doubles your lock time. So you could double the power of your vote to 200, but you'd be locking for twice as long, and it's late at night here. That's 56 days. And if you wanted to have triple, like so the power of 300, you'd have to double that again. So there's 112 days that you'd be locking up your tokens. And so even the smaller holders can, like, if they're really convinced of something that like it's really necessary, then they can vote with more power on their tokens. And then the passing thresholds depend on like the turnout, the proposal origin. I think my next slide is 2 slides around that. It's easier with a chart. So what is a proposal? It's any executable function. So this is kind of like where it becomes rigorous. Is that like you can't really have like a proposal that's like, oh, we should make this upgrade. You have to like write the code or the instructions, or maybe it's like a balance transfer, like or like the validator count is maybe a simpler example. So like we have like 300 validators in the network, and we decide, or somebody thinks it's a good idea, instead of 300, we should have 350. So there's a function call that requires special governance privileges called set validator count. And so somebody would make this, would create this function call of set validator count to 350 and code that into like the transaction serialization format of the network, and then actually submit this to be voted on. And so you're actually voting on executable instructions. And then like there's only one proposal per voting period. So there's none of this, having like multiple conflicting proposals that could like both pass at the same time. Set it to 300 and set it to 310. And then the referenda alternate between public and council proposals. So anybody, any token holder can make a proposal. And also like the council can make proposals, and then it just alternates, like it takes a public, then a council, then a public, then a council, and so on. So like these executable functions, they have anything that has governance, that goes through governance, kind of like it's this elevated privilege that we call root privilege. So it'd be kind of like the root user in Linux. And so we have like kind of these like special functions, like setting a storage item, or like setting the balance of an account, or changing the validator count, or even like kind of like allowing a parachain. So like most of our parachains get allocated by this auction mechanism. But we're certainly going to have parachains that like we think like, okay, like they're not going to raise funds for one of these dot auctions because like they don't have a token of their own, and it's kind of like a public good, so like a bridge to Ethereum or something. Like we kind of agree that like this is useful to everybody, and there's no sense in them like creating some like arbitrary token as a fundraiser to kind of like participate in the auction. So governance can just decide, like, hey, we're going to like give this team a parachain, and it can also like set the runtime itself. So like if you kind of look at the Polkadot host, or like a Polkadot client, it's really split into like 2 parts. So like there's like the host, which is really just like the RPCs and database, and most importantly, a WebAssembly execution environment. And then there's like the runtime, which is like all the rules of Polkadot, like like what kind of transactions are allowed, what's the actual like logic of the chain. And so one of these like privileged functions that we have is called set code, where you can just put in the runtime code. And so like the Polkadot client will just pull in like this executable and start executing it. You don't need to update the client at all like you normally would like in some other chain's hard fork. So this is like the adaptive quorum biasing. The goal here is to favor high stability and discussion like on very controversial proposals. So anything that comes from the, well, I guess like I'll back up and like just kind of explain this. Like the idea is that like as the turnout changes, then the actual like passing threshold also changes. So you'll see that like all of these, as you get to 100%, they all converge towards just a simple majority of like 50% to pass. Whereas like as you get closer to zero turnout, you know, like the positive and negative turnout biases get closer to 100 and 0% necessary. So if you look at the positive turnout bias, like this would be like the public proposals. So, you know, this is basically like untrusted code. Like we don't know who's calling this. Could be anybody. We don't know kind of like what the justification is. So this favors a status quo where, you know, if only like, you know, kind of just like eyeing this chart, you know, if 10% of the total like tokens come out to vote, then it would need 75% approval in order to pass. So, you know, if everybody participated, it would only be 50%. So it's still like the majority of token holders can still control the outcome of this vote. But if there's a small turnout, we don't want like, you know, one person who happens to have a lot of tokens be able to make some like malicious proposal and only like, you know, 0.5% of the network turns out to vote. And they're able to pass it because like they just have like 0.25% of the tokens or something. And so they can just pass it with a simple majority. If only like 0.5% of the network turns out, the actual threshold to pass is like very close to 100%. So it becomes like much, this very much favors the status quo when you're getting like untrusted proposals. Now, if you get something from the council that has 60% support from the council, it just goes into a simple majority vote. And then if you get something that's unanimous from the council, then it has this negative turnout bias, which is like it's like the default is that it passes, and it takes like a very heavy rejection in order to stop it. It turns out that just like kind of like wrangling the 13 to 19 people on the council to all vote within like some window can actually be difficult. I don't think we've ever actually seen a unanimous vote from the council. It's we've always just had this like 60% where it goes into a simple majority referendum. So yeah, this is kind of like a pretty picture to kind of like show how a lot of the stuff relates to each other. So dot holders vote on councilors and can also make these public proposals. And then these alternate like proposals from the council and proposals from the public go into this public referenda queue with varying turnout biases. And then the ones that pass get enacted. So yeah, so now we come to like the autonomous enactments that I've been alluding to like quite frequently. Like, so anything that passes, it goes into this dispatch queue. And then after the enactment period, the protocol like actually enacts the decision. So the like the proposal was just some like executable function. So it can just store this executable function on chain and then actually executes it at the end of this like enactment period. And so this actually makes the decisions meaningful because you're not relying on anybody else to do something. You have like from the quorum biasing, you have a formal way of saying like this proposal passed or it didn't pass, and then the system actually like automatically enacts that decision. It's not up to anybody else. And then so like, you know, we've been just talking about like Polkadot as kind of like the relay chain, or like at least maybe that was like kind of the assumption all along. But Polkadot is like primarily a host for parachains. And so when we talk about like who these members are, there's a lot of different stakeholders. Like they're not just token holders. There's validators, nominators, like parachains themselves. And so like there's a lot of different like incentives and perspectives on the network. And some of those aren't even from like individuals or groups. It's from like other blockchains, like parachains. And so like each parachain can have its own governance, its own economics, its own utility. And so like the parachains themselves can have like these accounts on the relay chain and can participate in the relay chain governance. And so like in this sense, it's very much like a well, yeah, it's very much like a collection of like nation states almost in a sense. So like one, you have like their treasuries, like like there's a Polkadot Treasury, the Kusama Treasury. These can hold like lots of different assets, not just the native one. So if you think about this, like we have like bridges between some chains now, so you can have like Bitcoin on Ethereum, and that's still kind of limited to this idea of like a person or like a smart contract on Ethereum, like owning those, and you can have like an individual or like some like multi-sig or like collective behind these accounts, but you're still talking about like individuals within the network and not the network itself. Like Ethereum doesn't own Bitcoin, right? It's just like some accounts on Ethereum own some representation of Bitcoin. But like in Polkadot, when we talk about like these cross-chain assets and governance and like having this like public treasury, we're actually talking about like one chain owning assets of another chain. So this would be like Ethereum actually owning some of Bitcoin. And so, much like a nation state can kind of have like its own treasury, and it can hold assets, whether they're like its own domestic things or like commodities, like gold or oil or like foreign currencies and stuff. Polkadot can hold assets from other chains. The parachains themselves can hold assets from Polkadot itself or like other parachains in the network. And so you have like kind of like this whole system of every parachain with its own governance, with its own economic model, and they're all participating in like the relay chains governance. And so this is really like almost like the UN or like NATO or something, where you have like all of these like sovereign states with their own governance systems, their own definition of like stakeholder or citizen or what have you, but they're all able to like kind of come together and participate in this overarching governance system as well. So I think this is like one of the kind of like breakthroughs or like next where Polkadot is like really pushing the like bleeding edge of this type of stuff. And then just like this, my last slide. So like our contributions to the space here. So Kusama last year had the first live on-chain upgrade. So we did an upgrade that would like normally require a hard fork in any other protocol, just by like submitting this proposal to change the runtime, and nobody had to like update their clients or anything like that. We've had 19 runtime upgrades and 9 other referenda on Polkadot. We've increased the seats on the Kusama Council from 13 to 19. We've increased the number of validators on both networks via governance. So Polkadot up to about 300 now, and Kusama up to 700. And then this idea of like decentralized sovereign wealth funds, where one chain in its treasury can own assets from another chain, and like its governance can decide how to deploy those assets or how to use them best. So that's the end of my presentation. And I'll check this question box.
Yeah, do you want to answer the questions and read them out yourself, or should I ask them for you?
I can read them.
Cool.
They're both from Juan. So using conviction in voting is a brilliant experiment. Is it easy to swap voting rules or have different concurrent voting systems in parallel? That's interesting. I mean, like the voting rules are part of the system itself. So yes, you could swap the voting rules as like part of a runtime upgrade that like, you can't change the rules like on the fly. So like you have some set of rules that you're using for governance now. And in like a runtime upgrade, you could propose a new set of rules that's like encoded in that runtime. That would, if it passes, then those would become the new rules when that got enacted. I hope I interpreted the question correctly. Have you explored systems with more chambers, Filecoin miners, clients, developers, token holders, and ecosystem participants, or 5 different stakeholders groups? Is this easy to model with Polkadot governance? Yeah, so we haven't like directly in Polkadot. So like in Polkadot and Kusama, we have just like this this council, technical committee, and then like the general body. As far as like the miners or like we have validators, we've like actually like explicitly separated those into totally different camps. So it's not like other networks where like if you nominate or like delegate to a validator that they've inherited any sort of governance right. They don't have like any kind of like exceptional governance power. They're just a validator, and their role as a validator is completely separate from their participation or non-participation in governance. But as far as like more chambers, this is actually like maybe like a better substrate question, because like as an example, the council and technical committee are just both instances of the same module. So like we have this module is called collective that kind of just defines these like very abstract rules of like how to define a collective of accounts. And in the runtime of Polkadot, we actually just instantiate the same module twice with different names, one the council and one the technical committee. And then like in the runtime, we just define the relationships between these modules, and like kind of like what are the rules to like have a member like join, or like why would a member have to leave, or like what kind of like privileges do these different groups get. And so you define the relationships between these instances in the runtime, but it's still like this very abstract logic for like how do you define a collective of people. And so in Polkadot and Kusama, we just had like these two, but we do have some parachains like Akala. I know, I think they have like 4 or 5 different councils. They have like a general council, they have a technical committee, and then they have some like protocols like this like LDOT, like a liquid staking, and then they have a like a lending Hansen protocol. I hope I got the names right. But you know, like they have a council just for like this lending protocol, and another council just for this liquid staking protocol, and then like their general overarching council. And so we have seen like parachains with that model of like having multiple different groups as councils or collectives with like special privileges for each one. What if code with an undetected bug is approved? Is there a rapid response fix, or does the fix have to go through the whole approve? Yeah, so that's like the main reason for like the technical committee's power to speed things up. So one is like if we actually like caught the bug before it got deployed, then you like we'd be able to like cancel that, and like the technical committee could say like, hey, we're canceling the enactment of this upgrade. And of course, like if they abuse that power, like they can only cancel the same one once. So like if people are like, no, that wasn't a bug, that's what we really wanted, they can go through again, and like they wouldn't have the power to cancel that. But also like if there is a fix that needs to go in, they could also accelerate putting in that fix and making sure that that fix happened. The only exception would be like if there were a bug that was bad enough to like completely halt the chain, where like, you know, in order to like make these decisions, you have to keep producing blocks and finalizing them to like finalize the decisions. So if the bug were so bad that like it completely halted the chain and like prevented any new blocks from being added, then yeah, you would be stuck and would have to like kind of do a hard fork back the chain up. But generally, we haven't had to do that. So hopefully we can keep going with that.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a really informative and exciting talk. Personally, for me, the adaptive quorum biasing seems super useful. I'm excited to see that. So Thank you very much for coming on, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy.
I'll catch you later. So guys, now I'm bringing on another speaker about Polkadot, which is really cool because we're transitioning. We mentioned a little bit about the Polkadot Treasury in the last talk, and I think now we're going to get to learn more about that. So I'm introducing David Hawig, Head of Grants at the Web3 Foundation.
Hey, can I
Hi.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. Sounds a little bit broken. Can you speak again?
Yeah, I can go closer to the mic, but worst case, then does it work? Okay.
All right.
All right. Yeah, maybe first a few words about myself. I'm working for the Web3 Foundation, so the entity behind Polkadot and Kusama. And yeah, before I joined Web3, I actually was working for my own startup. So, and we applied for a lot of, hey Elizabeth, we applied for a lot of grants ourselves. So I actually have the experience of applying for grants and also giving out grants. So I know both sides of the table. Maybe let's try to share my screen. All right. Yep. Okay, I'm going to talk today about the grants program as well as the Treasury. So maybe first the advertisement block about our grants program, because before we actually come to the Treasury. And yeah, let's start. First, a quick overview of our grants program. We usually focus on funding open source software development and research efforts. We focus on Polkadot, Kusama, and Substrate, but we usually support the entire Web3 ecosystem to a certain degree. But obviously, we collected funds for developing these 3 systems, and we also know we have the knowledge about these systems and know how to advance them. A few statistics about the program. We so far given out around 9 million, more than 500 applications. I think by now we signed over 200 projects and from all over the world, and the program originally started in 2018. As you can see in the diagram, actually, we are scaling up at the moment to a certain degree, and in the last month we almost signed 30 grant projects. So basically, every day we signed a grant project. What we are looking for, just to give you some examples, because usually we are interested in everything you are interested in the Web3 ecosystem, as long as it's open source and somehow beneficial for the entire ecosystem. So great examples are usually startups. We want to support any kind of early stage startup developing, for example, a proof of concept. We don't support the later stages if there's a business model or something behind it. Generally, teams shouldn't seek to cover 100% of their early stage funding via grants. And yeah, I could give you some examples here, like supply chain, DeFi, and things like this. But as I said in the beginning, we are usually looking for your ideas and your projects. We usually don't want to share something with you and you just develop it. We want that teams that apply for Web3 grants, at least in this space, in the startup focus space, actually do it because they are convinced about their ideas. Apart from this, there's obviously some core infrastructure we need to support, and here I need to give out a shout out to Kusama and the Polkadot host that is implemented by ChainSafe at the moment. That's also supported via Web3 grants, and other examples are API clients and things like this. We are usually looking for everything that is missing in the open source stack at the moment. So I don't know, for example, if there's a specific smart contract language or something like this, then we are interested in it. If there's a, I don't know, Dart or Swift API client that is potentially useful, then we would be interested in this. Another space we are usually looking for are research projects, and there I would say the crazier the better. So if you want to develop some DAG-based blockchain, I don't know, XYZ consensus with a proof of anything, then we would be interested in it as long as it's reasonable. And other examples, Joe already said, we are interested in governance and treasury systems, and obviously we are aware that there's still a lot of room to improve these things. So we are also looking for research projects in this sector. I haven't mentioned so far that we actually have 2 grant programs. We started out with a general grants program. That's our legacy grant program that allows submission via Google Forms, and it's more like a regular grants program. Things are paid in fiat, stable coins, Bitcoin. It's up to 100K. It's partly private, so you can make private submissions, and we pay in fiat. Compared to this, we have the new, I would say, default grants program. That's our open grants program. And this is basically our on-chain playing field. So everything takes place on GitHub. We hard code certain rules, like, for example, as soon as 3 people approve an PR, it gets merged. And once it's merged, it's basically accepted. And we also check milestones on-chain. On-chain, I already say on-chain. On GitHub, everything needs to be delivered via GitHub. We have the payment is obviously in cryptocurrency. So it's basically our playing field for things like the Onchain Treasury. And it's up to 30K, but we are open to issue follow-up grants up to 100K. And it's compared to the general grants program, it's usually very fast. We literally approved applications within 1 hour, because there's nothing like a committee meeting or things like this for regular programs. Basically, everyone can look at the application at any time and approve it or request changes and things like this. Then specifically for the open grants program, we try to involve the community. We try to test things that could potentially also run on-chain. Like, for example, anyone can suggest actually grants and grants ideas. So we have this RFP suggestion possibility. You can actually tell us what you need in the ecosystem. That's ideally, it's for example, for parachains that need a specific feature. Then they could say, hey, we are not able to develop this, but it would be very cool if somebody else develops it. And what we do is then we tell our outreach team to potentially find teams, but also we have these list of interesting projects into in our grants repository. An example for this, besides what I already mentioned, is like, for example, CK rollup stuff that is needed for a gaming chain, or API clients. Then we also have another community feature that recently integrated. Like I already said, we have this external milestone evaluation program where people actually can look into deliveries, evaluate them, like we would do publicly on our GitHub, and they can basically do my work to a certain degree and get paid for it. And the idea there is also to scale up the program further, to actually be able to deal with all these grant applications, and to improve the program also and make everything very transparent. Because to a certain degree, the money we are spending, we get got through token sales, so we want to give it back to the ecosystem. Now, a quick overview over the Treasury. I don't need to go too much into detail here, because Joe already mentioned quite a few things. So in general, it's an on-chain fund, a pot of funds that is basically collected through transaction fees, slashing events, staking inefficiency, things like this, where basically something on-chain is collected and it's not burned for Polkadot and Kusama. Instead, it's collected and you can reuse it for useful things. And it's this treasury is currently mostly controlled by the council. You could also think about other models there, and then spend it for projects in the ecosystem. And obviously the main goal here is to fund infrastructure, so like core development, useful features, similar to the grants program, but you obviously you're not acting in the same boundaries like the grants program. At the beginning, I said the grants program focuses mostly on the development of open source software. This is completely different for the Treasury. There are no legal restrictions and things like this. You can spend the money on marketing activities, anything that convinces basically the council to spend the money. And some statistics here, for example, on Kusama, there is quite a lot of money available. I don't know the current course, the life of KSM, but 250,000 KSM, already more than 50,000 KSM were spent on projects, 55 proposals, 35 got approved. And there's what's interesting is actually, and Joe didn't mention, I think, is that there's a burn rate. And this is basically an incentive for the Treasury to not just keep collecting the money, to not just grow indefinitely, but to actually spend the money to develop the ecosystem. And the same is true for Polkadot. Obviously, the numbers are a little bit lower because the network launched later, but overall it's similar. Something special about Kusama is actually that the money is not burned, but it's given to the society, which is kind of a crazy project to support the ecosystem, but also the awareness of the network. You can actually get a tattoo for joining the society. We have different interfaces currently for the Onchain Treasury. On the one hand, it's Polka Samply. On the other hand, there's Commonwealth, but I know quite a few other teams are working on it. And sorry. And in general, I think something that is often forgotten is that obviously there's a lot of experiments going on the lower levels regarding the exact implementation, but especially when it comes to things like Treasury, like voting and stuff, also you need to experiment and learn a lot about the UI and improve this. And yeah, maybe not just to give you a few additional points regarding the Treasury. So there are different mechanisms currently available in order to spend the money. On the one hand, it's just the regular proposal. There you are able to get basically a big grant up front to work on your project. But in order to receive this, you have to make a deposit on chain. This can obviously be done by anyone if somebody else thinks your project is interesting, then they could pay 5% of the total project budget up front and receive this money back later. Then there's this tips mechanism where anyone can basically submit a small tip for different work that is done already in the ecosystem, and then the council also needs to approve these tips. But that's usually for smaller things like, I don't know, translating Wikipedia articles, helping with documentation, and so on. And then there's also the newly integrated mechanism, because something we learned quite early is that proposals and tips don't scale very well, because council cannot look into everything and double check everything. That's why actually the community created a bounty runtime module. So this was not developed by Parity, but others like Kala, Polkadot, they came together and said, hey, we have an interest in leveraging the treasury potentially in the future, and we want to be paid by it. So we want to ensure that the treasury is actually, the money is used in the best way. And they came up with this bounty mechanism that is also now integrated into Sama and Polkadot. And there, it's a little bit like the grants program, because the council basically assigns a curator, or we call it evaluator, for the grants program that looks into the project and takes care of it. This could also be a multi-sig or multiple people taking care of it, but it's basically outsourcing different work in order to scale up the system. And the first bounty was actually to develop the UI for this bounty module. So this will be ready very soon, hopefully. And here, also to the right, you can see Polkadot.js. For everyone who isn't aware of it, that's basically the default interface where you can play around with everything and see the different tools and mechanisms. And the differentiation specifically regarding the grants program, because if you are interested in this talk, the chances are high that you want to actually apply for a grant and receive money for your project. And then usually people ask, should I initially apply for the treasury or for grants? So then it usually comes down to a few things. If you are interested in open source development and research, then the Open Grants program gives you some help that the Treasury currently doesn't, because it's a little bit more structured. We usually try to help grants team in our ecosystem. Like we once you deliver your project, or already if you apply for a grant, we actually look into your grant. We try to help you because we have an interest that you are successful to a certain degree in our ecosystem. So we point you to existing technology and things like this that's currently not so well structured for the treasury at the moment. But on the other hand, we act, we have certain boundaries. We are only focusing on open source development. We don't support things like marketing activities or other things. So if this is interesting for you, then you should probably apply for the treasury. And we, as I said, we usually focus on this early stage phase and supporting initial proof of concepts, infrastructure development. But when it comes actually to maintaining this infrastructure, then the treasury might be more interesting. If you actually want to create some public good parachain, for example, where you don't want to create your token model and create a business model around your idea, then the treasury might be the right place to talk to people, because there, compared to the grants program, we simply focus on the technology. But with the treasury, you need to convince and the community to a certain degree to fund your project. And it's independent of Web3, which is also a benefit regarding potential legal issues, just in case they exist, or other restrictions. And an advantage or disadvantage is that there's no payment in fiat, obviously. At least right now, there's no Oracle system in place. That's more or less already my presentation. And I'm happy to discuss potential questions.
Great. Thank you very much, David. That was super interesting, and excited to see the UI when it's live. It becomes a little bit more real. Yeah. So
yes,
we got.
It's usually very interesting to see projects in our ecosystem. When you get the initial grant application, you don't know what the end result.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly was surprising how well a project evolves over time.
That's great. Well, I've got two questions for you. The first question is, how do you balance ambition and practicality when evaluating grants?
Usually you get a good impression if teams are capable and interested in actually doing something. And if this is the case, then I'm to a certain degree already sold on these teams. I try to support them. I potentially put them in touch with other developers in case it would help or benefits the team. I can put them in touch with from Parity, with, I don't know, share these things. But sometimes you also have these teams that just do it for the money. And that's I guess, the biggest problem in our ecosystem. So they develop an idea and they stop working after it. And it will not be maintained. They have no interest in ever actually getting it ready.
Yeah. Awesome. So next question is, awesome to see the growth in the program and great to co-fund at times. This question comes from Juan. What can we, Filecoin PL, or the broader audience do to help more? Funding, reviewing, voting, referring technical teams?
I think we already started working on this, and I'm actually in close contact with Eva from the Protocol Labs team, and Boyar is presenting later. So we are generally, I think, especially with Filecoin, but also with all the other things, we are not really competitors at this stage, because we can help each other, and the space is still fairly small. So we have a huge market to conquer, so we don't just on each other's toes. And I think, we try to do this already. We established chats and exchanges between the different grants managers, and it's nice to see also teams like TeamSafe that basically work together with everyone, and also are a great place to combine this knowledge and create some exchange.
So exchange knowledge and exchange work?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah?
And there are a lot of things that are now kind of standards in the system and used by everyone, like BASM, as for example, WebAssembly is something that is now maintained by a lot of teams, and where we all can work together to improve it further.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David. This talk was very informative.
Thanks for inviting me, and nice content.
No problem. Yeah. See you around.
See you.
All right, guys. So we're going to take a short break, 2 minutes, and we'll be back with 2 presentations from Protocol Labs. I'm super excited to see them, and maybe you will be too. So please don't go anywhere, and I'll see you in 2 minutes.